The morning air over Walker Ranch was crisp enough to sting the lungs. The Texas sun had not yet burned the mist from the fields, and the dew clung like tiny diamonds to the fence posts Daniel Walker had spent the better part of his leave mending. He stood on the porch in his boots, coffee steaming in his hand, the weight of tomorrow heavy on his shoulders. Tomorrow, the army would call him back, and his boots would no longer touch this porch for months, maybe longer. Sarah leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, eyes squinting toward the barn where their daughter, Emily, chased a stubborn pony in circles. Sarah's messy bun wobbled when she laughed, though her laugh carried a note of exhaustion Daniel caught, even if she tried to hide it. "You think she'll ever get that pony to listen?" Sarah asked. Daniel smirked. "Not a chance. That pony's more mule than horse." But his smile faltered. The army had a way of stealing smiles right out of a man's mouth. They had built this ranch themselves, or rather, rebuilt it. The land had been in Daniel's family for 3 generations, but after his father died, the fences fell, the barn sagged, and neighbors whispered about vultures waiting for the Walker land to hit the market. Daniel had returned from his last deployment determined to put it back together. Sweat, busted knuckles, nights fixing beams by flashlight. Walker Ranch had risen again. It wasn't just land, it was their anchor. And now he had to leave it. Sarah must have read the heaviness in his silence because she set her coffee down and pressed her palm against his chest. "We'll be fine," she said, though her voice trembled just slightly. "The ranch will be here. I'll keep things running." Daniel kissed her forehead. "I know. It's just, every time I go, I wonder what's going to happen while I'm gone." It turned out he didn't wonder enough. 2 weeks later, Sarah checked the mailbox at the end of their gravel driveway and found an envelope with a logo she didn't recognize. Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. She frowned. They weren't part of Oak Ridge Estates. Their land sat adjacent to the tidy little subdivision with its cul-de-sacs, identical mailboxes, and fences so white they almost glowed at night. Walker Ranch was rough, open, free, a sprawl of pasture and oaks, cattle grazing against the horizon. The subdivision's borders stopped at their fence line. Still, the letter was addressed to Daniel and Sarah Walker. Inside, in bold print, were the words, "Notice of past due fees." Sarah's brow furrowed deeper with every line. According to the letter, the Walkers owed $4,200 in mandatory association dues. Failure to pay could result in liens, fines, or even foreclosure. She dropped the letter on the kitchen counter, her knuckles white. "What kind of scam is this?" she muttered. That evening, while Emily worked on homework, Sarah sat at the table with the letter spread open. She called the number listed at the bottom. A cheerful but clipped voice answered. "Oak Ridge Estates HOA office. This is Diane Keller, president. How may I help you?" Sarah stiffened. "This is Sarah Walker. I got a letter saying my ranch owes your HOA thousands of dollars. There's got to be some mistake. We're not part of your subdivision." On the other end, Diane gave a little chuckle, the kind of laugh that said, "I'm humoring you, dear, but I'm right and you're wrong. Mrs. Walker, Oak Ridge Estates recently voted to expand our jurisdictional boundaries to include neighboring properties. Your ranch falls within those boundaries. As such, you're required to comply with HOA regulations and pay the associated fees." Sarah's grip on the phone tightened. "Expand your boundaries? You can't just—" "Oh, but we can," Diane interrupted smoothly. "It's all in our charter. I suggest you pay the overdue amount promptly to avoid further action. Have a nice evening." The line clicked dead. Sarah sat at the table, her heart pounding. She stared at Emily across the room, pencil tapping against her workbook, oblivious to the storm that had just walked into their lives. By the time Daniel called from overseas 2 weeks later, Sarah had received 3 more letters, each one sharper than the last, each one signed with that perfect, looping signature, "Diane Keller, HOA president." She said what? Daniel's voice crackled through the delay on the line, but his fury carried clear as day. "Sarah, they can't just decide we're part of their neighborhood." "I know," Sarah whispered, trying not to let Emily hear. "But they're serious. They've added late fees, Daniel. It's almost $6,000 now. And Diane, she acts like she owns us." Daniel cursed under his breath, the kind of low, sharp curse he reserved for combat zones. Listen to me. Don't give them a dime. That ranch is ours. My father's blood is in that soil, mine too. I'll handle it when I get back. But Daniel didn't come back for another 7 months. And Diane Keller didn't wait. Sarah first saw her in person on a blazing July afternoon. The heat waves shimmered over the road, and Sarah was pulling weeds by the fence line when a silver Lexus rolled up. Out stepped Diane Keller, mid-40s, pressed navy slacks, a white blouse that looked like it had never seen sweat, and a smile as sharp as broken glass. "Mrs. Walker?" Diane called, striding up in designer heels that crunched against the gravel. Sarah wiped her brow with her forearm. "That's me. I'm Diane Keller, president of Oak Ridge Estates, HOA. Diane extended her hand as if she were bestowing some honor. Her nails were manicured, crimson red, gleaming in the sun. Sarah hesitated before shaking it. "We're not part of Oak Ridge." Diane's smile didn't falter. "You are now? And frankly, your property is bringing down the aesthetic of our community. The board has several concerns: barn visibility, livestock proximity, and of course, the rather rustic condition of your mailbox." Sarah's jaw tightened. "This is a ranch. It's supposed to look rustic." "Well, that may have been fine before," Diane said, brushing invisible dust from her blouse. "But now you're part of something bigger. If you want to avoid legal trouble, I'd suggest you cooperate, starting with your unpaid dues." Sarah felt heat rise in her chest, hotter than the Texas sun. "My husband is serving this country overseas. He's not here to argue with you, but I will." "Oh, I respect his service," Diane interrupted, raising a hand in mock reverence. "But service doesn't exempt you from community standards. Everyone has to play by the same rules, Mrs. Walker. Even soldiers' wives." The venom beneath those sweetly spoken words made Sarah's hands tremble. She clutched the fence rail to steady herself. "You'll be hearing from us again," Diane added, turning crisply on her heel. Her Lexus door shut with an expensive thud, and then she was gone, dust rising in her wake. Sarah stood frozen, sweat stinging her eyes, rage twisting her stomach. She looked back toward the ranch house where Emily's bike leaned against the porch. She whispered to herself, "Over my dead body." But Diane Keller was not bluffing. Over the following weeks, the letters turned into notices. Notices turned into threats. And threats turned into action. Sarah didn't know it yet, but paperwork was already moving through the county clerk's office. Paperwork Diane had greased with charm, intimidation, and connections. Paperwork that said the Walkers were delinquent, that their ranch was encumbered, that foreclosure was not just possible, it was imminent. All while Daniel fought half a world away, never imagining that the real war waited for him at home. The day Sarah found the foreclosure notice taped to her door, her knees nearly buckled. Emily tugged at her sleeve, wide-eyed. "What's wrong, Mama?" Sarah folded the notice against her chest so her daughter couldn't read it. Her voice cracked. "Nothing, baby. Let's go inside." But inside, Sarah collapsed against the counter, the notice fluttering to the floor. It bore the seal of the county. It bore Diane Keller's name. And it bore the words that turned Sarah's blood to ice. Property to be sold at auction. The war for Walker Ranch had begun. Sarah hardly slept the night after she found the foreclosure notice taped to the door. She lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above, her mind churning with questions she couldn't answer. How could they do this? How could one woman, with her clipped voice and manicured nails, strip them of everything they had fought for? The next morning, she called Daniel overseas. The connection was terrible, static slicing through every other word, but his voice thundered through the line when he heard the news. "They can't auction the damn ranch," he barked. "Sarah, listen to me. That's our land. They don't have the right." Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered back, "Daniel, they already filed it with the county." For the first time in their marriage, Sarah heard helplessness in his tone. Thousands of miles away, serving his country, Daniel was shackled by distance. He couldn't walk into the clerk's office. He couldn't face Diane Keller. He couldn't throw his weight against the tides sweeping them under. "All right," Daniel said finally, his voice low and grave. "Find a lawyer. Whatever it costs, do it. Just hold them off until I get home. Sarah did as he said. She drove 2 towns over to meet a real estate attorney, a gray-haired man who read the foreclosure documents with a deep frown. Mrs. Walker, he said, pushing his glasses up his nose. This is unusual. I've seen HOAs overreach, but this is aggressive. They voted to redraw their boundaries and applied it retroactively. And it looks like they filed liens for unpaid dues before you even knew you owed them. So what do we do? Sarah asked, hope flickering in her chest. The lawyer sighed, closing the folder. The trouble is, they've greased the right palms at the county. Challenging this would take months, maybe years, and a small fortune in legal fees. By the time we make any headway, the ranch could already be sold. Sarah's hands trembled. You mean, we could lose everything? The lawyer gave her a pitying look. I'm afraid so. And so it was that a month later, Sarah stood in the back of a county courthouse, Emily's hand clutching hers, while an auctioneer rattled off numbers. The Walker Ranch, her home, her daughter's safe place, Daniel's legacy, went to the highest bidder in less time than it took to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Sarah couldn't breathe as she watched the papers change hands. The winning bid came from a property development firm, though Diane Keller was there too, arms crossed, lips curled in a victorious smirk. When it was over, Sarah staggered outside into the blistering Texas heat. Emily tugged on her sleeve. Mama, what's happening? Sarah knelt and pulled her daughter close, tears streaking down her cheeks. We're gonna be okay, baby, she whispered. I promise. But inside, she didn't believe her own words. The new owners wasted no time. Within weeks, strangers moved onto the ranch house porch, boxes piled high. Sarah had no choice but to pack what she could and rent a small house on the outskirts of town. Every mile she drove away from the ranch felt like a knife twisting deeper. One evening, while unpacking dishes in the cramped rental kitchen, she caught a glimpse of Emily sitting on a box, hugging her stuffed horse to her chest. Mama, Emily said softly, when Daddy comes home, how will he find us? Sarah's throat closed. He'll always find us, baby. Always. But Sarah knew that when Daniel returned, he wouldn't recognize the world he left behind. Daniel's homecoming was supposed to be joyful. The Army base organized a family day, flags waving, brass band playing. Sarah dressed in her best jeans, Emily in a red, white, and blue dress, and they held a sign that read, Welcome home, Daddy. Daniel stepped off the transport plane, his face leaner, his eyes harder, but the moment he saw them, he broke into a grin that cracked his exhaustion. He scooped Emily into his arms, kissed Sarah like he was starving for her. But when they climbed into Sarah's dusty pickup and he asked, Let's go home, the smile faded from his face. Sarah gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Daniel, she whispered, we're not there anymore. Confusion clouded his face. What do you mean? She drove him past Walker Ranch so he could see for himself. The sight made his chest seize. Strangers' trucks parked in the drive, children's toys scattered on the porch, a sold sign leaning against the mailbox, spray painted in red like a wound. Daniel got out of the truck without a word, duffel bag thudding onto the dirt. He stood frozen, staring at his father's land, his land, occupied by strangers. A woman stepped out onto the porch, holding a baby. She looked at Daniel like he was trespassing. Can I help you? She called. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. His voice came out rough, ragged. This is my house. The woman's eyes narrowed. Not anymore. We bought it fair and square. Talk to the HOA if you've got a problem. Behind her, a silver Lexus pulled into the drive. Diane Keller stepped out, immaculate as ever, sunglasses glinting in the sun. She spotted Daniel immediately and smiled with smug satisfaction. Staff Sergeant Walker, she said sweetly, striding up the path. Welcome home. I trust your deployment went well. Daniel turned, fury in his eyes. You stole my ranch. Correction, Diane said smoothly. Your property was sold at public auction due to non-payment of fees. Perfectly legal. Perfectly fair. Sarah caught his arm, trying to steady him, but Daniel shook her off. My wife told you we didn't belong to your damn subdivision. Diane tilted her head, the picture of false innocence. Oh, but you did. And when people don't play by the rules, they face the consequences. That's how community works. Daniel's jaw worked furiously. His whole body shook, not from fear, but from the kind of rage born of helplessness. You have no idea what you've done, he said quietly. Diane smirked, sliding her sunglasses back into place. On the contrary, I know exactly what I've done. She walked back to her Lexus, leaving dust swirling in her wake. Sarah slipped her hand into Daniel's, but it was like holding a live wire. That night, in their small rental, Daniel paced the floor while Sarah sat silently on the couch. Emily slept in the next room, unaware of the storm brewing. They stole it while I was over there fighting for people I don't even know, Daniel said, his voice breaking. And I come home, and my own people, my neighbors, steal from me. Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears. What are we going to do? Daniel stopped pacing. His face hardened. We're going to take it back. He started making calls the next morning. Old army buddies, men who knew him from dusty roads in Afghanistan and desert nights under fire. Some lived nearby, some a few states over, but every one of them listened when Daniel said, "They stole my land while I was deployed. I need your help." By the end of the week, a half-dozen veterans were sitting around the Walker's kitchen table, drinking bad coffee and studying the foreclosure papers. Big Mike, a towering man with a prosthetic leg, slapped the papers down. "This is horse crap. You don't lose a ranch over some HOA fee. They targeted you 'cause you weren't here to fight back." Corporal Reyes, younger, sharp-eyed, leaned forward. "What's the play? Legal fight? Or something less legal?" Daniel's eyes burned with determination. "We're not breaking laws, but we're not rolling over either. They think we're weak because I was gone. They forgot I don't fight alone." The room buzzed with agreement. The men who had faced enemy fire beside him were ready to face a new enemy at home. Sarah watched from the doorway, her heart torn between fear and pride. She knew the war for Walker Ranch wasn't over. It was only beginning, and Diane Keller had no idea what kind of storm she had provoked. The morning Daniel and his men made their move, the air over Oak Ridge Estates was unnaturally still. Not a breath of wind stirred the manicured hedges or the rows of pristine mailboxes. By dawn, Daniel and half a dozen veterans rolled into the subdivision with trucks, trailers, and equipment. Neighbors peeked through blinds as the convoy rolled past, dust trailing behind. Sarah stood at the edge of the rental driveway with Emily clutching her hand, watching Daniel drive off with a grim determination she had only ever seen in combat zones. The target wasn't violence. It wasn't vandalism. It was reclamation. Walkerland, Big Mike muttered as he adjusted his cap. Time to remind them who they messed with. The first order of business was the sign. Overnight, they had carved a massive wooden arch, letters burned deep into the planks. Walkerland. They planted it at the entrance to Oak Ridge Estates, concrete still wet around the posts. By the time the sun broke over the horizon, anyone driving in or out had to pass beneath it. Next came the fences. Barbed wire stretched across cul-de-sacs. Pasture gates appeared where sidewalks once ran smooth. Within hours, cattle from Daniel's herd were grazing on what had been emerald green lawns. A few residents came outside, mouths agape, as a dozen cows meandered across driveways and chewed ornamental shrubs. Corporal Reyes whistled low. Suburbia meets ranch life. Bet Diane Keller's losing her mind right now. And she was. By mid-morning, Diane's silver Lexus screeched into the subdivision. She slammed the door, heels clicking furiously against the pavement as she stormed toward the wooden arch. "Daniel Walker," she shouted, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Daniel stepped forward, hands on his hips, boots dusty, jaw clenched. His men fanned out behind him, arms crossed, their presence radiating silent strength. "Taking back what's mine," Daniel said flatly. "This is illegal." Diane's face flushed crimson beneath her perfect makeup. "You can't just march in here with your band of soldiers and veterans," Big Mike interrupted, his deep voice like a cannon. "Respect the title." Diane's eyes darted nervously at the men towering around her. She straightened her blouse and forced a brittle laugh. "This is ridiculous. I'll have the sheriff out here in an hour." Every one of you will be arrested for trespassing. Daniel leaned in, his voice low but firm. Call whoever you want. But understand this. You stole my land while I was overseas serving this country. That makes you a thief. And I don't let thieves walk free on my property. Diane's lips trembled, but she masked it with a smile. This isn't your property anymore. Daniel pointed toward the sprawling pastures beyond the subdivision. Look around you, Diane. These cookie-cutter houses, these fences, this whole thing was built on Walker soil. My family owned it before you were even born. You bought a piece of my land. You follow my rules. Behind him, the veterans nodded. The statement carried the weight of soldiers who had seen blood spilled in deserts and jungles, men who knew what loyalty meant. For the first time, Diane faltered. She turned sharply, retreating to her Lexus. But Daniel knew this was only the opening volley. By noon, the sheriff's cruisers arrived. Red and blue lights flashed across Walkerland's new arch, sirens cutting the heavy air. Deputies stepped out cautiously, hands resting near their holsters. Diane Keller marched up to them, fingers stabbing the air toward Daniel. Arrest him. Arrest all of them. They've taken over the subdivision. They've got livestock trampling private property. This is anarchy. The sheriff, a weathered man with a gray mustache and eyes that had seen too much, looked past Diane to Daniel. His gaze softened. Walker. Daniel nodded. Sheriff. The two men had known each other since high school. They weren't friends exactly, but the sheriff knew Daniel's service record, knew the Walker's legacy on this land. What's going on here? The sheriff asked. Daniel stepped forward. They stole my ranch while I was overseas. Sold it out from under my wife and kid. This isn't just some HOA squabble. It's theft. Diane sputtered. That's a lie. We followed every legal process. He refused to pay his dues, and we. Dues? The sheriff interrupted, his brows knitting. Diane, since when does your HOA stretch all the way to Walker Ranch? Diane faltered for a split second before composing herself. The board voted to expand jurisdiction. Perfectly legal. It was filed with the county. The sheriff turned back to Daniel. You got proof they sold it out from under you? Daniel pulled a folded packet of papers from his back pocket. Copies of foreclosure notices, deeds, and letters signed in Diane's elegant script. He handed them over without a word. The sheriff studied them for a long moment, jaw tightening. Then he looked back at Diane. This doesn't look right. Diane's eyes flashed with fury. Sheriff, you can't possibly side with him. He's defying the law, undermining our community. Or maybe, the sheriff said slowly, you overstepped your authority. A murmur rippled through the growing crowd of residents gathered nearby. Some looked uneasy, glancing between Diane and Daniel. Others nodded quietly, sympathy in their eyes. They hadn't signed up for this war, but now they were in it. The standoff stretched into the afternoon. Deputies stayed, keeping watch, but they didn't make arrests. The veterans held their ground, calm but immovable. By late day, news cameras arrived. A reporter shoved a microphone toward Daniel. Staff Sergeant Walker, can you tell us what's happening here? Daniel glanced at Sarah, who stood with Emily at the edge of the crowd, worry etched into her face. He stepped toward the camera, voice steady. What's happening? He said. Is that a homeowners association decided they had more power than the Constitution? While I was deployed, serving overseas, they stole my ranch. They thought my family would be easy prey. But they forgot one thing. I didn't fight alone then, and I don't fight alone now. Cheers erupted from the veterans behind him. The crowd surged with energy, the tide turning visibly against Diane. Diane forced a smile for the cameras, stepping forward. Don't be fooled. This man lost his property fair and square. The HOA operates within its legal rights. But the crowd booed. For the first time, Diane Keller's composure cracked. Her eyes darted nervously as the sheriff crossed his arms, expression grim. Daniel lifted his chin, looking directly into the lens. We're not leaving until justice is done. This land is Walker land. Always has been. Always will be. The moment felt electric, as if the whole town held its breath. And far beyond Oak Ridge Estates, people began to take notice. Veterans groups shared the story online. Talk radio hosts fumed about an HOA stealing from a soldier's family. The Walker Ranch standoff was no longer just a local dispute. It was a flashpoint. That night, as the veterans camped on the subdivision green, Sarah found Daniel sitting by a lantern, Emily asleep in her lap. His eyes were tired but burning with resolve. "You sure about this?" she asked quietly. Daniel looked down at his daughter's sleeping face, then back at Sarah. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." And as the stars spread across the Texas sky, Diane Keller sat in her immaculate home, hands shaking as she poured a glass of wine. For the first time since she began her crusade, fear slipped past her polished exterior. Because Diane had underestimated Daniel Walker, and she had no idea that the Army itself was about to weigh in. By sunrise, the story had already gone national. News vans lined the road into Walkerland, cameras flashing at the wooden arch where Daniel's veterans kept their quiet vigil. The subdivision, once pristine, once a monument to HOA order, now looked like a battlefield camp. Cattle grazed on lawns. Barbed wire glistened with dew. Veterans leaned against trucks, their faces solemn in the morning light. Inside her kitchen, Diane Keller stood frozen, clutching a mug of coffee gone cold. Every channel she flipped to carried Daniel Walker's face. His words replayed again and again. "This land is Walkerland. Always has been. Always will be." Diane's carefully curated life was unraveling. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Angry residents, furious board members, even her own sister demanding to know what she'd done. And now the sheriff had raised doubts about the HOA's legal rights. Diane felt the walls of her empire closing in. Still, she wasn't ready to surrender. She smoothed her blouse, touched up her lipstick, and told herself she could outlast him. She had no idea who was coming. By mid-morning, the first convoy rolled into town. Olive drab Humvees, military transport trucks, dozens of soldiers in uniform. The veterans rose to their feet as the convoy approached, the rumble of diesel engines sending a shiver through the air. Residents peered from behind curtains, some rushing outside, jaws dropping. From the lead Humvee stepped a tall officer, metals gleaming, posture ramrod straight. He removed his cap, scanning the scene with practiced eyes before spotting Daniel. "Staff Sergeant Walker," he called, voice booming like parade ground thunder. Daniel stepped forward. "Sir." The officer extended his hand. "Colonel Harris. I served with your father back in '91. His grip was firm, his eyes sharp with respect. "We saw what happened on the news. Thought you could use some backup." Daniel's throat tightened. "Sir, this is a civilian dispute. I don't want to drag the Army into." The colonel cut him off. "Son, you are Army. And when one of ours gets cheated while he's overseas, we don't stand by and watch." Behind him, soldiers began unloading supplies, tents, generators, water tanks. They set them up with the same precision they'd used in desert camps. Walkerland was becoming a fortified base. Diane stormed forward, hair perfectly sprayed, eyes wild. "This is outrageous. You can't just bring the Army into a homeowners association matter." Colonel Harris didn't even flinch. He fixed her with a stare so cold it froze her mid-step. "Ma'am, this isn't about dues or bylaws. This is about a soldier's family being robbed while he bled for this country. That makes it everyone's business." The crowd erupted in cheers. Residents who had remained silent now clapped, some even shouting Daniel's name. The tide had turned completely. The next blow to Diane came not from Daniel, but from her own neighbors. An elderly man in a flannel shirt, face weathered by years of Texas sun, stepped out of the crowd. "I remember when your daddy used to let us hunt deer on this land, Daniel. Place belongs to your family. Always did." A younger couple followed, holding their toddler. "We bought here thinking it'd be a safe place to raise our kids. But this HOA, it's been nothing but fear and fines. We're with you, Walker." One by one, residents voiced their support. Some cried. Some shouted. All of them turned their backs on Diane. Her perfect little kingdom was crumbling right in front of her eyes. By late afternoon, the final act began. Lawyers arrived from the state capitol, waving documents and citing property laws. The sheriff met them with Daniel's packet of proof, shaking his head. "This ranch wasn't abandoned," the sheriff declared. "It wasn't foreclosed. It was stolen under fraudulent pretenses. Diane's face drained of color as the lawyers read the documents. Every signature, every shady vote, every maneuver to extend the HOA's reach. It was all there, and it was all illegal. Mrs. Keller, one lawyer said coolly, you could be facing charges for fraud, coercion, and unlawful seizure of property. Gasps swept through the crowd. Diane staggered back, clutching her pearls as if that might shield her from the words. Daniel stepped forward, Sarah and Emily beside him. His voice was calm, steady, but there was steel underneath. You tried to take everything from us. You thought I'd be too far away, too busy serving, to fight back. But you forgot, I don't fight alone. Sarah's hand slipped into his. Emily hugged his leg. Around them, veterans and soldiers stood tall, a wall of loyalty and strength. This is our land, Daniel said, raising his voice. And it's staying ours. Cheers thundered across Walkerland, so loud it drowned out Diane's sob. The following week was a blur. The county invalidated the HOA's fraudulent claims. Diane Keller was removed from her post and charged with multiple counts of fraud. Her Lexus sat abandoned in her driveway as she awaited trial. Oak Ridge Estates voted to dissolve the HOA entirely, tired of fear and tyranny. And Daniel Walker reclaimed his ranch. The barbed wire came down, but the sign remained, Walkerland. A reminder, a promise. Veterans stayed for weeks, helping mend fences, rebuild barns, and restore the land. Neighbors pitched in too, bringing food, supplies, and apologies for not standing up sooner. The Walkers' home filled with laughter again. Emily ran barefoot across the grass. Sarah's smile returned. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in fire, Daniel sat on the porch with Sarah curled against his side. You think it's finally over? She asked softly. Daniel looked out at the land, his land, stretching golden into the horizon. It's over, he said. Then he kissed her temple. And it's just the beginning. Emily burst out of the house, waving a drawing. Daddy, look. I drew our ranch. Daniel took it, eyes misting as he saw the crayon picture. A house, cattle, and a big wooden arch that read Walkerland. He pulled his daughter into his arms, voice breaking. That's perfect, baby girl. And for the first time in months, Daniel Walker felt peace. Diane Keller never regained her power. Her name became a cautionary tale in town, whispered with disdain. Some said she moved away. Others said she stayed, bitter and forgotten. But Daniel didn't care. He had his family. He had his ranch. And he had something Diane would never understand: respect, loyalty, and a community that had finally remembered what mattered. The Walker Ranch was more than land. It was legacy. And no HOA, no self-righteous president, no amount of greed could ever take it again. As the stars filled the Texas sky, Daniel whispered a quiet promise to himself, to his father, and to the men he'd lost overseas. This land is ours. Always has been. Always will be. And under that vast sky, Walkerland thrived. If you enjoyed this intense story, smash that like button and subscribe for more gripping, cinematic tales. Don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss the next thriller. Your support keeps these stories coming.